What if I told you there was an engine so powerful, so dominant, that NASCAR had no choice but to shut it down? An engine that rewrote the rules of racing, terrified the competition, and became the most feared V8 in American motorsports history. This is the story of the Dodge 426 HEMI, an engineering marvel that was too fast, too radical, and for a brief moment, too illegal. Why did NASCAR really ban it? Was it truly unbeatable or just unfair? And how did Dodge take what was essentially a race-only monster and sneak it onto the streets to force its way back into the winner's circle? In the early 1960s, the American horsepower war was raging. Chevrolet had its big blocks, Ford had its FE series, but Chrysler was plotting something else, something that would crush them all. The engineers at Dodge and Plymouth didn't just want to compete. They wanted total domination. They resurrected an old-school concept, hemispherical combustion chambers. But this time, it wasn't theory, it was a threat. The result? A 426 cubic inch engine that shattered records the moment it roared to life. Richard Petty behind the wheel, victory after victory, until NASCAR said, "Enough." But was the ban about fairness or fear? Over the next 12 minutes, we're peeling back the layers of one of America's greatest automotive conspiracies. From top-secret development and rulebook loopholes to the real reason why Dodge's 426 HEMI vanished from the track and how it came roaring back to life. Strap in. This isn't just engine history, it's horsepower warfare. In 1963, the landscape of American motorsports was about to change forever. While Ford and Chevy were slugging it out with brute force and big blocks, Chrysler was quietly building a weapon behind closed doors. Deep in the heart of Highland Park, Michigan, a small team of engineers was handed a simple directive: win. Not just compete, obliterate the competition. Their answer? The 426 cubic inch HEMI. At the time, Chrysler already had a legacy of innovation. But what they were planning wasn't just another engine. It was a resurrection of a forbidden technology. HEMI, short for hemispherical, described the unique shape of the combustion chamber that allowed for more efficient airflow, cleaner burns, and significantly more power. It had been used before in the 1950s, but this new version was no relic. It was a revolution. Dubbed the elephant engine for its sheer size and raw strength, the 426 HEMI was unlike anything else on the track. Massive cylinder heads, oversized valves, forged internals, and dual four-barrel carburetors. It was built to dominate, and it did. Chrysler debuted the engine at the 1964 Daytona 500, and what happened next stunned the world. Richard Petty, driving a Plymouth powered by the 426 HEMI, didn't just win, he annihilated the field. Petty led 184 of 200 laps. Dodge and Plymouth took 4 of the top 5 spots. The message was loud and clear. The HEMI wasn't here to play fair, it was here to win. Suddenly, the racing world had a problem. The HEMI was too good, too fast, too advanced. Competitors cried foul. NASCAR, under immense pressure, responded quickly. By the end of 1964, the 426 HEMI was banned. Officially, it was for failing to meet production requirements. But the paddock whispers told a different story: fear. The 426 HEMI hadn't just shown up, it had taken over. And in doing so, it triggered one of the most controversial bans in racing history. When NASCAR dropped the hammer on Dodge's 426 HEMI in late 1964, it wasn't just a rules change, it was a shot across the bow. On paper, the reason was simple. The HEMI wasn't available in production cars, violating NASCAR's strict homologation rules. But behind that technicality was a storm of politics, pressure, and panic. Let's rewind. After Richard Petty's overwhelming victory at Daytona, competitors cried foul. The HEMI was a purpose-built race engine with no showroom counterpart. Ford and GM teams couldn't keep up, and the racing world erupted with claims of unfair advantages. Whispers turned into protests, and soon NASCAR was facing a full-blown crisis. In response, NASCAR instituted a new rule for 1965. Any engine used on the track had to be available in a production car, specifically at least 500 units built for public sale. Dodge hadn't done that. The HEMI was still a pure race machine, And just like that, the 426 was out. But was that the whole story? Insiders suggest there was more to the ban than just paperwork. Ford had been pressuring NASCAR to keep the field level. Their own 427 wasn't performing at the same level, and Chevy was sitting out the season after GM's corporate racing ban. That left Dodge and Plymouth running wild, and NASCAR's leadership knew it couldn't afford a one-brand monopoly on victory lane. Bill France, the iron-fisted founder of NASCAR, was known for protecting the sport's balance. Too much dominance from one manufacturer could alienate fans, drivers, and sponsors. The HEMI's ban wasn't just technical, it was strategic. So Chrysler had a decision to make: walk away or fight back. And they chose war. Instead of backing down, Chrysler responded with a bold move. They greenlit production versions of the 426 HEMI for the street. The goal? Build the required 500 units and force NASCAR's hand. In 1966, that's exactly what happened. The Dodge Coronet, Charger, and Plymouth Belvedere rolled off the line with HEMIs under the hood. Brutal, barely street-legal machines that existed solely to put Dodge back on the racetrack. The gamble worked. NASCAR lifted the ban. The HEMI returned. And it was just as savage as before. But that year off the track had consequences. Other teams had caught up. Ford came out swinging with its improved 427. The game was tighter. But the legend of the HEMI had already been cemented, not just for its performance, but for surviving one of the most politically charged bans in racing history. This wasn't just horsepower. This was corporate warfare, fought on asphalt. Chrysler's comeback wasn't just a technical feat. It was a strategic masterstroke. After being banned in 1965 for not meeting NASCAR's production requirements, Dodge and Plymouth didn't whine. They went to work. Their mission was simple: make the 426 HEMI street legal. But make no mistake, this wasn't about selling cars. It was about getting back on the track. To meet NASCAR's rules, Chrysler needed to build and sell 500 production cars equipped with the HEMI engine. That number wasn't chosen at random. It was designed to keep exotic, race-only power plants out of competition. But Chrysler played by the rules and then bent them in their favor. They dropped the race HEMI into civilian metal: Dodge Coronets, Chargers, and Plymouth Belvederes. But these weren't grandma's grocery getters. The HEMI street cars were stripped-down missiles: manual steering, heavy-duty suspensions, 10.25-to-1 compression ratios, and brutal cam profiles. Driving one was like taming a caged animal. Most buyers weren't looking for comfort. They were racers, drag strip warriors, street kings. These cars were sold out of dealerships but built for one purpose: to beat everything in sight. And they did. In stock form, a street HEMI could lay down quarter-mile times in the low 13s, unheard of for a production car in the mid-60s. With homologation secured, NASCAR had no choice but to lift the ban. And in 1966, the 426 HEMI returned to racing, louder, meaner, and backed by a factory that had just gamed the system. Richard Petty was back behind the wheel, and this time he wasn't holding back. Petty would go on to win 8 races that year and capture the Grand National Championship. The HEMI didn't just return, it dominated, again. But more than just victories, Chrysler had pulled off something bigger. They'd proven they could outwit the system. The HEMI's presence on the street wasn't about sales. It was a loophole come to life, a necessary evil to unlock track glory. The homologation hustle became the stuff of legend. It was the perfect blend of engineering brilliance and corporate rebellion, and it cemented the 426 HEMI as a symbol of performance that refused to be silenced. On paper, the 426 HEMI was a monster. Officially rated at 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, it was among the most powerful engines of its era. But anyone who's ever driven or raced one will tell you that number was a lie. Because the real story? The HEMI was sandbagging. During the muscle car era, manufacturers had all kinds of reasons to fudge horsepower ratings. Insurance companies were jacking up premiums for high-output engines, and emissions regulations were starting to creep in. Advertise a lower number and you saved your customers money and stayed under the radar of the feds. But there was more. Chrysler insiders, racers, and dyno data all suggest the HEMI wasn't making 425 horsepower. It was pushing closer to 475, maybe even 500 in some setups. The engine's monstrous airflow, massive valves, aggressive cam, and high compression ratio meant it breathed better, revved harder, and delivered more grunt than the spec sheet admitted. And then there were the time slips. In stock form, a HEMI-equipped muscle car could run low 13 seconds in the quarter mile on street tires. That wasn't just quick, that was drag strip royalty. These weren't just factory hot rods. They were thinly disguised race cars, and they ran like it. The idea of underrating engines wasn't unique to Dodge. Chevy did it, Ford did it, but with the 426 HEMI, the deception became part of its legend. It was the engine that pretended to play fair, while secretly breaking every rule in the book. Even more fascinating, the engine wasn't just fast, it was consistent. Racers knew the HEMI could take abuse. It could run all day at high RPMs without giving up. Its forged internals, cross-bolted mains, and bulletproof construction weren't just overkill. They were the reason it became the backbone of drag racing for decades. Was the 426 HEMI underrated? Absolutely. But more than that, it was underestimated by regulators, by rivals, and by anyone who believed the brochure. By the early 1970s, the golden age of muscle was coming to a screeching halt, and even the mighty HEMI couldn't escape the fallout. After years of dominance, the same forces that had tried to ban the 426 on the racetrack now came for it on the streets. And this time it wasn't NASCAR, it was the government. Rising insurance premiums made high-performance cars too expensive to insure. New federal emissions regulations began to choke the power out of even the fiercest engines. And the fuel crisis of 1973 loomed just around the corner. Gas wasn't just expensive, it was political. Suddenly, 8 miles per gallon didn't seem like a badge of honor. It was a liability. Chrysler tried to adapt. Detuned versions of the HEMI started to appear. Compression ratios dropped. Carburetors were restricted. But the writing was on the wall. The fire-breathing, drag-strip-dominating, track-winning 426 HEMI was being smothered. In 1971, the final nail was hammered in. That year marked the last time the 426 HEMI would be offered in production cars. Only a few hundred units were built, scattered across Dodge Challengers and Plymouth Cudas. They were expensive, impractical, and loud in every possible way. But they were also sacred, mechanical dinosaurs that knew extinction was coming. And then, it was over. The HEMI disappeared from showrooms. NASCAR evolved. New technologies rose. But for many, that moment marked the end of something bigger. The death of unfiltered, untamed American horsepower. The 426 HEMI didn't go quietly. It left burnouts, trophies, and legends in its wake. And even in death, it refused to be forgotten. Because the end of the HEMI era wasn't just a goodbye, it was the start of a legacy. Decades later, the legend of the 426 HEMI refuses to die. It lives in drag strips, in collectors' garages, and in every whispered story of muscle car glory. Mopar fans worship it. Racers still chase its legacy. And in 2017, Dodge revived the spirit with a supercharged Hellcat and Demon. Modern monsters inspired by that same unrelenting HEMI DNA. The 426 wasn't just an engine. It was a movement. And somewhere, tucked away in a dusty garage or roaring down a back road, a real-deal HEMI is still out there, hungry, howling, and very much alive.